relationship that Paul Bearer shared with The Undertaker, who was his most known representative. But the relationships that he had with people like Kane, Mankind, and Vader, and Goldust, who he played a critical role in the development of in the mid-90s. I think the mid-90s were the best years of Paul Bearer's career, and if I had to designate one moment, although I don't really have one particular Paul Bearer moment that stands out to me, it's when he betrayed The Undertaker in 1996 and he aligned himself with Mankind, which really was the birth of the Mankind-Undertaker feud. Even though their Hell in a Cell match is looked at their best match out of every match that they have had, I think the matches they had in 1996 really put both of their characters in a position to challenge for the WWE Championship and really elevated them to superstardom, and it goes back to the contributions of Paul Bearer. The Undertaker was turned on by Paul Bearer at the 1996 SummerSlam during the first ever Boiler Room Brawl, and the inspiration behind a lot of future Boiler Room Brawls that would happen in the WWE. I believe the second Boiler Room Brawl didn't happen until 1999 between Mick Foley and The Big Show during the Attitude Era, but it was certainly the inspiration behind a lot of future Boiler Room Brawls and hardcore matches in the WWE, and it was the inspiration behind one of the most infamous storylines in the mid-90s, and it was a huge contribution to the Monday Night Wars between WWE and WCW, and if not for those storylines that were created by The Undertaker, Mankind, and Paul Bearer, and all the other people that Paul Bearer represented throughout his career, either in the WWE or outside of the WWE probably wouldn't have jumped ahead against WCW in the ratings war as quickly as they did. So it goes back to history between The Undertaker, Mankind, and Paul Bearer, and throughout his career, Paul Bearer played a considerable role in the development of a lot of characters, and just his personality is a personality that will never be forgotten by personalities that work with the WWE and even wrestling fans outside of the WWE that don't really get a glimpse into everyday life within the business and really don't grasp the understanding of what the business is truly like. I know there is a lot of kayfabing that goes on in the business, but his personality was much like his everyday personality that he had outside of the wrestling business. Of course, he was a real-life mortician, and he just had such a passion for his job, unlike anything else that I have ever seen in the professional wrestling business. I've had a chance to speak with Paul Bearer both through email and through some brief phone conversation, and he is such a wonderful person to get to know, and I have no regrets from meeting Paul Bearer the way that I did through either email or through phone conversations, and I have nothing but the best to say about Paul Bearer. I think one thing about him was he knew when to draw a fine line between what actually is reality and what happens in the wrestling business, and he knew when to turn off his character. I think he wanted a lot of separation from the media, and he wanted to keep a low profile in the wrestling business, and that's why sometimes his personality was looked at as somewhat as a miserable one. But for those who got a chance to know Paul Bearer and work with him in the professional wrestling industry, they got to know him for the downhearted, kind-hearted individual that Paul Bearer truly was, and I think that that contribution will never ever be forgotten. And if I had to remember Paul Bearer for one thing and one thing only, it was his colorful personality and just the everyday person he was outside of the wrestling industry, of course, as a real-life mortician, which a lot of legends in the WWE who have worked with Paul Bearer over the years still talk about to this day, how he was a real-life mortician, and the only time they want to do business with him outside of professional wrestling is when they are dead and gone, because that's really the only time they will ever have a chance to do it. And I'm sure that he takes his job outside of the wrestling business as seriously as he took his job inside of the wrestling business as Paul Bearer. Of course, his real-life mortician job was a huge reason for him being the Paul Bearer character on WWE television. And I really would have loved to have seen Paul Bearer do more in his wrestling career. I mean, I know he did a lot, but I think he could have wrestled. That would have been kind of fun to see Paul Bearer wrestle against people in storylines. I loved seeing him as a manager, but I would have loved to have seen Paul Bearer cross that line from manager to wrestler and team up with The Undertaker in tag team matches. I think he would have created a lot of interesting storylines, and it probably would have been those storylines that were paid attention to the most in the mid-90s and during the Attitude Era. He was just as big a part of the Attitude Era as he was in the mid-90s, but I would have loved to have seen him wrestle against people like The Undertaker in matches during the mid-90s, of course, when he turned heel and aligned himself with Mankind to start one of the most infamous feuds in the WWE. And I also would have loved to have seen him do the same thing in the Attitude Era, and it's just a shame we never got a chance to see Paul Bearer become an in-ring performer. But outside of the ring, he was just as dedicated a performer as he probably would have been as a wrestler, and I would have loved to have seen him, turn that leaf over and would have started wrestling in the WWE. I think that would have created some marvelous storylines and some great Paul Bearer moments. And that night that they had the Raw tribute show for Paul Bearer, They showed a lot of moments of his career, and the thing about Paul Bearer's moments they showed were a lot of the moments were not physical moments. They were just moments where he was cutting a promo for someone he was representing, talking about a pay-per-view match that they had coming up, or just some moments they had happening backstage with Paul Bearer. There was a promo they had where the Undertaker versus Undertaker match was being promoted a couple of days before SummerSlam, when Paul Bearer was emphasizing on the return of the Undertaker for the first time since the '94 Royal Rumble. I caught that promo from the March 11th edition of Monday Night Raw last year. There was another promo that happened on Superstars back in 1991 when Paul Bearer first aligned himself with the Undertaker, which is the most known personality Paul Bearer has worked with throughout his career. The moment on Superstars where Brother Love turned over the managerial rights of the Undertaker to Paul Bearer, that was a turning point in both the careers of Paul Bearer and the Undertaker, because that created thereafter so many memorable Paul Bearer Undertaker moments that wrestling fans, I think, will never ever forget. And wrestling fans who were diehard fans back in the early 90s, that is a moment that I think really stands out to them. And I'll never forget when Paul Bearer was by the side of the Undertaker when he won his inaugural WWE Championship, which he lost just a few days after winning it at the '91 Survivor Series at Tuesday in Texas. He coughed it up to Hulk Hogan, and it wasn't until 1997, 3 or 4 years after winning the WWE Championship for the first time, that he won the championship for the second time in his career. He would go on to win an additional few times, including a reign as world champion on SmackDown. And when they had the second half of Paul Bearer's run with The Undertaker in 2009-2010, that was an amazing, amazing half of The Undertaker Paul Bearer history, because it solidified it and it got it to a point of conclusion. They had a short run of the Paul Bearer Undertaker storyline in 2004 when The Undertaker returned for the first time as the Dead Man. They had the Concrete Crip match to get Paul Bearer out of the business. And I want to just talk about that a little bit, because that was a moment when Paul Bearer realized that he had to draw a line between reality and the professional wrestling business, and he wanted to keep a low profile. I'll never forget that short run that he had in 2004. It was 6 years after the run in 2004. They started the second half of the Undertaker Paul Bearer history, and it got it to a point of solidification, and it got it to a point of finality, which you can't help but appreciate. And if not for that run they had in 2010, I think that WWE would have had a lot of regrets now that Paul Bearer passed, given his circumstances that befell his life and how he passed away at the age of just 59 years of age. He didn't even reach 60. My dad, who just recently passed away, reached 60 years of age, so we got a year in addition to Paul Bearer's life. And it's very lucky that you reach that age now. So with the circumstances that befell Paul Bearer, joining the list of wrestlers who have died over the last 25 years, I think WWE would have had a lot of regret if they never had that run in 2010, that brief run they had with the Undertaker Kane storyline, and Paul Bearer aligning himself with both the Undertaker and Kane for a brief amount of time. The last time we saw Paul Bearer on television, I believe it was in 2010 when they had that storyline with Kane and Edge was going for the World Championship against Kane, who had held that title for a number of months, and that was one of the longest reigns Kane ever had as World Champion, when he was being represented by Paul Bearer. And I think it's a storyline that wrestling fans are never going to forget. Boy, is it ever scary when you go on sites like YouTube and you pull up these videos of all these wrestlers who have passed away over the past at least 25 years. The list of wrestlers consists of over at least 60 wrestlers who have passed away. Wrestlers of the past and wrestlers of more recency are listed in this video. I remember one particular video that listed all the deaths from back as far as the 1980s up until the current time of professional wrestling when the video was uploaded, and it was truly frightening taking a look back at how many wrestlers had passed away over the last at least 25 years. As a quarter of a century now, Paul Bearer joins that list of wrestlers who are known names. And the thing about it is, with Viscera being the latest name, these are known personalities we've gotten to know over the years, and I've had a chance to see some of their best matches in their careers, and I've even had a chance to interview some of these wrestlers who have passed on, and I've got this emotional connection with the wrestling business that is very hard to put into words for me, but I try to do it all the time when people interview me on radio shows for sites like blogtalkradio.com. It is really hard for me to describe this emotional connection, but believe me when I tell you, it is unlike anything else that you will ever experience in your life. If you ever make the choice to get involved with the wrestling industry, one of the best ways to start doing it is by doing a radio show or writing a written column every week for a website. And I got a chance to meet a lot of wrestlers, and I had a chance to interview them before their passing and before they were even inducted into the Hall of Fame. That would happen years after. I had a chance to interview people like Ted DiBiase and some of the wrestlers who had passed away. I had a chance to interview the Legion of Doom, which was a great opportunity of mine, an opportunity that I still talk about to this day, and it's unlike anything. You get this emotional connection with the wrestling business that is very hard to put into words, but believe me when I tell you, it is unlike anything that you will ever experience in your life, and I do recommend that you get involved with the wrestling industry if ever presented with the opportunity. But it's something that you really got to be sure of, because you will have this emotional connection that will follow you everywhere you go, and you will never get away from it, believe me when I tell you. And some of these wrestlers, the thing is, I got a chance to know them personally and very deeply, and I got a chance to know a lot of things that a lot of wrestling fans don't necessarily know about these wrestlers. And knowing they passed away years after I interviewed them, I had a good friend, Michael Porter. In 1993, he was a ring announcer in the WWE, and he drove the production truck for the WWE. He simultaneously drove the production truck and the ring truck, and played a role in setting up the sets for WWE 93, and was a fill-in ring announcer. And when he passed away, after having interviewed him at least up to six times, it was an emotional thing that I had to go through, and it was one of the most difficult things of my entire career, having to come to terms with the fact that he had passed away. And I just recently lost my dad, and that was another difficult obstacle to have to overcome. So, I mean, you do get this emotional connection with everything you do for this business, and it's something that you'll never ever forget. I'll never forget the Michael Porter tribute shows that I had a chance to speak on, talking about the life of Michael Porter. And I do thank all the wrestling fans who brought the anniversary of the Paul Bearer passing to my acknowledgement, because I would have never thought about doing an anniversary special for Paul Bearer. So in conjunction with that, I do thank you, and I do invite you to share with us your favorite Paul Bearer moments throughout his career, and all the critical roles that he had in the development of a lot of superstars like The Undertaker, Kane, and Mankind, who were really his three main clients, who he played a critical role in the development of. And I truly believe to this day, I'll go on record for saying, if not for the contributions of Paul Bearer, The Undertaker, Kane, and Mankind, more especially than people like Vader or Goldust, would have probably never been as big of a name as what they were in their careers. They probably would never have amounted to the characters they amounted to, if not for the contributions of Paul Bearer. And I think that reason alone makes Paul Bearer certainly one of the top 5 greatest managers of all time, if not the greatest manager of all time. There was a DVD released years ago called The Greatest Wrestling Managers of the 1980s, and I think that Paul Bearer's name deserved to be on that list. I didn't get a chance to see that documentary, but it is a documentary that I do recommend you check out, and it will put into perspective for you just how much of a manager Paul Bearer was, and just how great of a personality he was, and how truly he was one of the definitive names in professional wrestling. And if you hadn't had a chance to check out some of these Paul Bearer tributes that fans have been uploaded in the way of graphics, videos, photos, articles, we do invite you to subscribe to us on Facebook. You can do that through our Facebook page at HCW Entertainment, on our Twitter at Jonathan Clarke 1. You can follow and listen to our show. Our archives pop up in our tweet archives on our Twitter all the time.